The moment I opened my front door to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk, I knew my peaceful Saturday morning was about to get significantly worse. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of false politeness that middle-aged HOA presidents perfect over years of terrorizing their neighborhoods. "I need to discuss a very serious matter with you." I leaned against the door frame, already feeling the familiar ache in my lower back from standing too long. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. What can I do for you?" She adjusted her designer glasses and consulted her clipboard like it was some kind of holy scripture. "According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines, all homeowners are responsible for snow removal not only on their property, but also on the common area steps adjacent to their units. You failed to shovel the communal staircase leading from the parking area to the upper units." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "Patricia, those steps are nowhere near my townhouse. I'm in Unit 7. Those stairs are by Units 14 through 20. "Nevertheless," she continued, ignoring my point entirely, "the rotation schedule has you assigned for this month. You received the email 3 weeks ago. I don't recall any email about shoveling steps that aren't even close to my property." I shifted my weight, trying to ease the pressure on my spine. The surgery I'd had 8 months ago in Denver had helped, but standing in the cold doorway wasn't doing me any favors. Patricia's expression hardened. "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse, Mr. Jensen. The Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association expects all residents to contribute equally to community maintenance. I need those steps cleared by tomorrow morning, or you'll face a fine of $250. My jaw tightened. "Look, Patricia, I have a medical condition that prevents me from doing that kind of heavy labor. I can barely shovel my own walkway, and even that takes me twice as long as it should." "That's not my problem," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "Everyone has aches and pains, Mr. Jensen. I have arthritis in both knees, but you don't see me shirking my responsibilities. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, those steps better be clear." She turned on her heel and marched back down my front steps before I could respond. I watched her go, feeling anger and frustration building in my chest. This wasn't the first time Patricia Henderson had made my life difficult since I'd moved to Pinewood Heights in Colorado Springs last year, but it was definitely the most unreasonable demand yet. I closed the door and limped back to my living room, where I'd been enjoying my coffee and watching the snow fall outside. Now, the peaceful scene just reminded me of the impossible task Patricia had just assigned me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my emails, searching for this supposed rotation schedule. Nothing. Not in my inbox, not in spam, nowhere. The problem was my back injury. 2 years ago, I'd been a construction foreman in Denver, living a normal life and doing physical work every day without thinking twice about it. Then came the accident at the work site when a scaffold collapsed while I was on it. 3 vertebrae compressed, 2 herniated discs, and months of physical therapy later, I was declared permanently disabled. The settlement from the company's insurance had been enough to buy this modest townhouse in Colorado Springs and set me up for a quieter life, but it hadn't fixed my spine. I could do light tasks, walk around, live independently, but heavy lifting and repetitive bending were out of the question. My doctor, Dr. Sarah Morrison at Peak Medical Center, had been very clear about that. She'd filled out all the paperwork for my disability designation, and I had the documentation to prove it. The next morning arrived cold and bright, with 3 more inches of fresh snow covering everything. I looked out my window at 7:30 and saw Patricia standing at the base of those communal steps with her phone out, clearly taking pictures of the still snow-covered stairs. I felt my stomach sink. I bundled up and made my way over to where she stood, the walk alone making my back complain. "Patricia, I need to talk to you about this." "The deadline was 8 o'clock, she said without looking up from her phone. "But I can already see you haven't done the work. That's a $250 fine, Mr. Jensen." "I'm physically unable to shovel those steps," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "I have a legitimate disability. I was in a construction accident that damaged my spine. I can provide medical documentation." Patricia finally looked at me, and her expression was one of pure disdain. "Everyone has an excuse, Mr. Jensen. I've been president of this HOA for 7 years, and I've heard them all. Bad back, bad knees, bad shoulder. The rules apply to everyone equally. No exceptions. This isn't an excuse, it's a medical fact. I'm protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can't force me to perform physical labor that would injure me." She laughed, actually laughed, right in my face. "The ADA doesn't apply to HOAs, Mr. Jensen. We're a private organization. You signed the covenant when you bought your property. You agreed to follow all rules. If you can't fulfill your obligations, perhaps you should consider selling and moving somewhere more suitable to your limitations." The way she said limitations made my blood boil. "You're seriously telling me you won't make a reasonable accommodation for a disabled resident?" "I'm telling you that you owe the HOA $250, due within 30 days. Consider this your official notice." She handed me a printed form that she'd apparently prepared in advance, already filled out with my name and the fine amount. "Have a good day, Mr. Jensen." I stood there in the cold, holding the ridiculous fine notice, watching Patricia walk away toward her own townhouse at the far end of the complex. Around me, other residents were going about their Sunday morning routines. A few had seen the interaction and quickly looked away when I made eye contact. Nobody wanted to get on Patricia's bad side. Back in my townhouse, I called my brother Marcus in Seattle. He'd been through his own legal battle with a landlord a few years back and always had good advice. "She said what?" Marcus's voice rose in disbelief when I explained the situation. "She said the ADA doesn't apply to HOAs and that I have to pay the fine or face additional penalties." "That's complete garbage, Sam. HOAs absolutely have to comply with fair housing laws, and the ADA definitely applies when it comes to reasonable accommodations. You need to talk to a lawyer." I was hoping to avoid that, legal fees and all. Initial consultations are usually free. "Look, you've got clear medical documentation of your disability. What she's doing is textbook discrimination. At minimum, a letter from a lawyer will probably make her back off." Marcus was right. I spent the next hour researching disability rights lawyers in Colorado Springs. Most of the websites I found talked about employment discrimination, but finally, I came across the office of Rebecca Carlson, an attorney who specialized in ADA compliance and fair housing issues. Her website had several testimonials from people who'd faced discrimination from landlords and HOAs. I sent an email explaining my situation, not really expecting to hear back until Monday at the earliest. To my surprise, my phone rang less than an hour later. "Mr. Jensen, this is Rebecca Carlson. I just read your email about the HOA situation. Do you have time to talk right now?" Her voice was professional but warm, and I immediately felt more hopeful. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Cases like yours are exactly why I got into this field. Walk me through everything that's happened, starting from the beginning." I explained the whole situation, from Patricia showing up at my door to the fine notice I now held in my hand. Rebecca asked pointed questions about my medical condition, what documentation I had, and exactly what the HOA rules stated about snow removal duties. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Here's what's happening. Your HOA president either doesn't understand the law or is choosing to ignore it. The Fair Housing Act absolutely applies to HOAs, and it requires them to make reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. Exempting you from physically demanding tasks that would cause you harm is the definition of a reasonable accommodation." She seemed pretty confident that she was in the right. She's wrong. Very wrong. And if she pushes this, she's going to expose the HOA to significant liability. These cases can result in substantial damages, especially if there's evidence of willful discrimination. Rebecca paused. "I'd like to take your case, Mr. Jensen. I work on contingency for these types of situations, which means you don't pay unless we win. My fee would come from any settlement or judgment." What would taking the case actually involve? First, I'll send a formal letter to the HOA explaining the law and demanding they rescind the fine and adjust their policies to accommodate your disability. We'll give them a chance to do the right thing. If they refuse, we file a complaint with HUD, that's the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and potentially a lawsuit in federal court. But in my experience, a strongly worded letter from an attorney usually solves these problems quickly. Nobody wants the legal exposure. I felt relief washing over me. Yes, I'd like to move forward with that. Perfect. I'm going to need you to send me all your medical documentation, the HOA covenant, any correspondence you've had with the board, and that fine notice. Can you do that today? I'll scan everything and email it within the hour. Excellent. One more thing, Mr. Jensen. Don't pay that fine. Don't make any more statements to Patricia Henderson or any other board members without consulting me first. If they contact you, be polite but refer them to my office. After we hung up, I spent the afternoon gathering all the documents Rebecca needed. My medical records from Dr. Morrison clearly stated that I had chronic pain and limited mobility due to the workplace injury, that I was permanently restricted from heavy lifting and repetitive bending, and that I qualified for disability status under both Social Security and ADA guidelines. I had the HOA covenant that I'd signed when I bought the place, and I made sure to include screenshots of my email inbox showing no rotation schedule had ever been sent to me. By evening, everything was sent to Rebecca's office. For the first time since Patricia had showed up at my door, I felt like maybe this situation wouldn't completely ruin my life. Monday morning, I was making breakfast when my phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. The subject line was "Second Notice Snow Removal Violation." I didn't open it. Instead, I forwarded it directly to Rebecca. She called me 20 minutes later. I just read her email. She's now threatening additional fines for each day you don't clear the steps, and she's saying she'll file a lien against your property if the fines aren't paid within 60 days. Can she actually do that? Technically, HOAs do have the power to place liens for unpaid fines, but only when the fines are legitimate. These aren't. What she's doing is actually making our case stronger because it shows a pattern of harassment. I'm sending my letter to the HOA board today via certified mail and email. I'm copying all board members, not just Patricia. How do you think they'll respond? We'll find out soon enough. In my letter, I'm being very clear about the legal consequences they're facing. I'm also requesting copies of all HOA communications about snow removal duties and any minutes from meetings where this policy was discussed. We're building a record here. The certified letter went out that afternoon. I got a copy by email, and reading it made me feel validated in a way I hadn't expected. Rebecca's letter was professional but firm, laying out in precise legal language exactly how the HOA was violating the Fair Housing Act and ADA. She cited specific case law, referenced federal regulations, and made it crystal clear that continuing to pursue fines or other penalties against me would result in legal action. Wednesday morning, 3 days after Patricia's first visit, I was getting my mail when I ran into another resident, Tom Waverly from Unit 9. He was an older guy, retired military who'd always been friendly. "Hey, Sam," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I heard about what's going on with Patricia and the snow shoveling thing." "Yeah, it's been a mess." He glanced around like he was worried someone might overhear. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but Patricia's been telling people at board meetings that you're just lazy and trying to get out of doing your share. She didn't mention anything about you being disabled." My hands clenched. "She knows I'm disabled." I told her directly, and now my lawyer has sent formal documentation to the entire board. Tom's eyebrows went up. "You got a lawyer involved." I had to. She wouldn't listen to reason. "Good for you, honestly. Patricia has been on a power trip for years. She's driven 3 families out of Pinewood Heights with her constant fines and harassment. I've thought about running for board president myself just to get rid of her, but she has enough friends who vote as a bloc." He shifted his weight. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that not everyone here agrees with how she runs things. Some of us think she's out of control." "I appreciate that, Tom. Really." Thursday afternoon, Rebecca called with an update. I got a response from the HOA's lawyer. They've apparently just hired legal counsel, a guy named Donald Pritchard. He sent me a pretty aggressive email saying the HOA stands by its policies and that homeowner covenants are enforceable contracts. So they're not backing down. Not yet. But here's the interesting part. Pritchard's email focused entirely on contract law and didn't address the disability discrimination issue at all. Either he doesn't understand what he's dealing with, or Patricia didn't tell him the full story. I sent him a follow-up email being very explicit about the ADA and Fair Housing Act violations, and I attached all your medical documentation. If he's competent at all, he'll advise his client to drop this immediately. And if he's not competent, then we file a HUD complaint and possibly a federal lawsuit, and the HOA will end up paying a lot more than just your attorney fees. Friday brought more snow, another 4 inches overnight. I looked out at the communal steps, still uncleared, and wondered if Patricia was taking more pictures to document my supposed violation. My own walkway took me nearly 40 minutes to clear, working slowly and carefully to avoid aggravating my back. By the time I finished, I was exhausted and in pain. The idea that anyone thought I should then go shovel a long flight of communal stairs was insane. That evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Betty Sherman, another board member who lived in Unit 12. She was in her 60s, always seemed kind, and I'd never had problems with her. "Sam, I hope I'm not bothering you," she said when I opened the door. "Not at all. Come in." She shook her head. "I'll just be a minute. I wanted to apologize to you personally. I just found out this week about your medical condition and what Patricia's been doing. She never mentioned any of this at the board meetings. She told us you simply refused to follow the rotation schedule out of stubbornness. She told me the ADA doesn't apply to HOAs and that I had no right to ask for accommodations." Betty's face fell. "Oh my God. Sam, I'm so sorry. That's completely wrong. I used to work in property management, and I know for a fact that fair housing laws apply to us. I confronted Patricia about this today, and she got very defensive. Said you were making it up and trying to manipulate the board." I have documentation from my doctor. My lawyer has sent everything to the HOA's attorney. I know. I saw the letter from your lawyer in the board packet. Sam, I'm calling for an emergency board meeting. We have 7 board members total, and I've been talking to the others. Most of us had no idea what was really going on. Patricia handles a lot of the day-to-day enforcement stuff, and we trusted her to be fair. Obviously, that was a mistake. I appreciate you coming to talk to me, Betty. It's the least I could do. We'll get this straightened out. And honestly, between you and me, I think it's time for Patricia to step down as president. This isn't the first time she's caused problems, but it might be the most serious. After Betty left, I called Rebecca to update her on the conversation. That's a very good sign, she said. It sounds like the other board members are realizing they have a serious problem. Patricia may have been acting without full board authority, which actually protects the other members somewhat but puts her in a worse position personally. Could she be held personally liable? Potentially, yes. If it can be shown that she was acting outside her authority, or that the board directed her to stop, and she continued anyway, personal liability becomes much more likely. But let's see what happens at this emergency meeting. Betty's intervention might resolve everything. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. Betty had emailed me personally to invite me to attend, saying I'd have a chance to address the board if I wanted. Rebecca advised me to go, but to be careful about what I said. Don't be confrontational, she told me during a prep call Monday afternoon. Stick to facts. Explain your medical condition in simple terms. Emphasize that you want to be a good community member and you're willing to contribute in ways that don't require heavy physical labor. Show them you're reasonable and that Patricia is the problem, not you. Tuesday evening was cold and clear. I arrived at the clubhouse at 6:50, 10 minutes before the meeting start time. A few residents were already there, including Tom Waverly, who gave me an encouraging nod. Betty was setting up papers at a table at the front of the room, and Patricia was sitting off to the side, looking furious. At 7 o'clock, Betty called the meeting to order. All 7 board members were present. Betty as vice president, Patricia as president, and 5 others including Tom, who I hadn't realized was on the board. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Betty began. We have an urgent matter to address regarding a potential legal issue affecting the HOA. I'm going to ask Sam Jensen to speak first and explain his situation, then we'll discuss how the board should respond. Patricia immediately stood up. This is highly irregular. We don't allow residents to address emergency board meetings without prior approval. Patricia, sit down, Betty said firmly. You're the reason we're having an emergency meeting. The rest of the board deserves to hear directly from Sam what you've been doing. 2 other board members nodded in agreement. Patricia sat down, her face red. I stood and walked to the front, my hands shaking slightly. Public speaking had never been my strength. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board, I began. My name is Sam Jensen, Unit 7. 2 years ago, I was injured in a workplace accident that permanently damaged my spine. I have compressed vertebrae and herniated discs that cause chronic pain and limit my mobility. I'm classified as disabled under both Social Security and HOA guidelines, and I have extensive medical documentation from my doctor at Peak Medical Center. I paused and looked around the room. Most people were listening intently. Patricia was staring at the wall. Last Saturday, Patricia Henderson came to my home and informed me that I was assigned to shovel the communal steps by the upper units. I explained that I'm physically unable to do that kind of heavy labor. She told me that the HOA doesn't apply to HOAs and that everyone has aches and pains. She fined me $250 and threatened additional penalties if I didn't comply. Someone in the audience gasped. One of the board members, a woman I didn't know well, shook her head in disbelief. I never wanted to involve lawyers or create problems, I continued. I just want to live peacefully in my home. I'm happy to contribute to the community in ways that I'm able to do. But I cannot perform physical tasks that will injure me, and I shouldn't have to. The law protects disabled people from this kind of discrimination, and I'm simply asking the HOA to follow the law. I sat back down, my heart pounding. Betty stood up again. Thank you, Sam. Patricia, would you like to respond? Patricia stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Jensen is exaggerating a common back problem to avoid his responsibilities. I've managed this HOA for 7 years, and I've never had anyone refuse an assignment. If we start making exceptions, everyone will claim some kind of problem to get out of work. Patricia, Tom Waverly interrupted, did you see Sam's medical documentation before you issued the fine? I didn't need to. He could be making it up. But he's not making it up, Betty said. I've reviewed the medical records his lawyer provided. He has severe, permanent damage to his spine. Multiple doctors have stated he cannot do heavy lifting or repetitive bending. This isn't a fake injury to avoid shoveling snow. Patricia's jaw clenched. The rules apply to everyone. Not when applying them violates federal law, said another board member, a younger guy named Chris. I'm an HR manager, and we deal with ADA compliance all the time at my company. What you've described doing to Sam would get our company sued into oblivion. This is exactly what reasonable accommodation is for. Our HOA attorney says the covenant is enforceable, Patricia shot back. I spoke to Donald Pritchard this afternoon, Betty said. After I explained the full situation to him, including the medical documentation, he admitted that the HOA could face serious liability if we continue to pursue this. He advised us to rescind the fine immediately and establish a formal accommodation policy. Patricia's face went from red to pale. You spoke to our attorney without board approval. I spoke to him to get legal advice about a potential lawsuit, which is exactly what board officers are supposed to do. And frankly, Patricia, the fact that you didn't tell the rest of us about Sam's disability or the letter from his lawyer is a serious breach of your duties as president. The meeting devolved into arguing between Patricia and the other board members for several minutes. Finally, Tom Waverly made a motion to vote on 3 items: rescinding my fine, establishing a formal accommodation request process for disabled residents, and removing Patricia as board president pending a full investigation of her conduct. The vote wasn't even close. 6 board members voted yes on all 3 items. Patricia was the only no vote. She stood up, grabbed her belongings, and stormed out of the clubhouse without another word. After the meeting, several residents came up to shake my hand and apologize. Betty asked me to stay for a few minutes while the board finalized some paperwork. Sam, on behalf of the board, I want to formally apologize for what you've been through, Betty said, handing me a letter. This states that all fines against you are rescinded, and that you're exempt from any physically demanding community tasks due to your documented disability. We're also going to review all of our policies to make sure nothing else creates problems for residents with disabilities. Thank you, Betty. I really appreciate this. We should be thanking you. If you hadn't stood up to Patricia, she would have kept abusing her position. We've had complaints before, but nothing that rose to this level. Your case made us realize we had a serious problem. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in days. When I called Rebecca to give her the update, she was pleased but cautious. That's great news, but we're not done yet. I want to get a formal settlement agreement in writing, signed by the board. We'll include provisions that protect you from any retaliation and that establish clear policies for accommodation requests going forward. If Patricia has friends on the board, she might try to make trouble once things calm down. She was voted out as president. She doesn't have power anymore. She's still a board member and she's still a homeowner. Angry people do stupid things. Let's protect you properly. Over the next week, Rebecca negotiated a comprehensive settlement agreement with the HOA's attorney. The agreement stated that I was permanently exempt from all physically demanding community tasks, that I could request additional accommodations if needed, that the HOA would establish an ADA compliance policy, and that the HOA would pay Rebecca's legal fees. The board also agreed to conduct mandatory fair housing training for all current and future board members. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong about Patricia. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I started noticing weird things. My trash cans, which I left at the curb for pickup on Thursdays, were repeatedly knocked over and spilled across the street. My mailbox flag was bent. Small things, annoying things, but nothing I could definitively prove was intentional. Then I came home from a doctor's appointment on a Tuesday afternoon and found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, citing me for excessive noise violations and unauthorized exterior modifications. The notice was signed by Patricia Henderson. I called Rebecca immediately. "She's still harassing you," Rebecca said, her voice tight. "This is retaliation and it's illegal. Forward me that notice right away." Within an hour, Rebecca had sent a cease and desist letter to both Patricia personally and to the HOA board, warning that any further retaliatory actions would result in an expanded lawsuit seeking damages for harassment. She also filed a formal complaint with HUD, detailing the entire situation including the retaliation. Betty called me that evening, apologizing profusely. "Sam, I am so sorry. Patricia typed up that notice herself and put it on HOA letterhead without board approval. We've informed her in writing that she no longer has authority to issue any violations or fines. We're considering removing her from the board entirely." "She's not going to stop, Betty. This is personal for her now." "I know. We're having an emergency meeting tomorrow night to discuss removing her completely. Several residents have come forward since the last meeting with their own stories about Patricia harassing them over minor issues. We should have dealt with this years ago." The board meeting the next night was tense. I didn't attend this one, but Tom Waverly called me afterward to fill me in. "We voted to remove Patricia from the board entirely," he said. "She's out, completely out. She threatened to sue us, said we were conducting a witch hunt, but we have documentation of multiple policy violations and unauthorized actions. Our attorney said we have solid grounds for removal." How did she react? Not well. She started yelling about how she'd built this community and we were all ungrateful. Then she said something interesting. She said, "You haven't seen the last of me, and Sam Jensen is going to regret the day he moved here." We have it recorded in the meeting minutes because our secretary was taking notes. That threat made me nervous, and Rebecca took it seriously too. "Document everything," she told me. "If you see Patricia near your property, take photos or video. Keep a log of any suspicious incidents. If she's making threats, we may need to pursue a restraining order." For a few days, things were quiet. Then, on a Sunday morning in early March, I woke up to find someone had spray-painted "liar" in huge red letters across my garage door. I immediately called the police. 2 officers from the Colorado Springs Police Department arrived within 20 minutes. I explained the entire situation with the HOA, Patricia's removal, and her threats. You have any direct evidence that this Patricia Henderson person did this? One officer asked while the other took photos of the damage. No, but she's the only one with a motive. She's been harassing me for weeks. We'll file a report for vandalism, but without evidence or witnesses, there's not much we can do. I'd suggest installing security cameras if you haven't already. I called Rebecca next. She was furious. This has gone too far. We're filing for a restraining order against Patricia today. And I'm recommending you file a full lawsuit against her personally and the HOA for the harassment, discrimination, and now vandalism. Will that actually accomplish anything? It'll make it very clear that her behavior has consequences. And honestly, Sam, you deserve compensation for what you've been through. This has been months of stress, harassment, and now actual property damage. That's worth something. That afternoon, I went to Home Depot and bought 2 security cameras with night vision and motion detection. I installed them that evening, covering my front door and garage area. The timing turned out to be perfect. 3 nights later, at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cameras. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as someone approached my garage with what looked like another can of spray paint. The motion-activated lights I'd also installed kicked on, illuminating the person clearly. It was Patricia Henderson. She froze in the light, looked directly at the camera, and then ran back to her car parked down the street. But I had it all on video, crystal clear, timestamp and everything. I saved the video file and called the police again. This time, when the officers arrived, I had evidence. "That's definitely enough for charges," the officer said after watching the footage. "That's attempted vandalism, and given the restraining order your lawyer filed, she's also in violation of that by being near your property. We'll go have a conversation with Miss Henderson right now." I watched from my front window as the police cars drove down to Patricia's townhouse. Lights came on inside, and after about 20 minutes, Patricia emerged in handcuffs. She was shouting something I couldn't hear from that distance, but her body language made it clear she was not going quietly. The next morning, Betty called me. "Sam, I heard about Patricia's arrest last night. On behalf of the entire board, I want you to know that we support you completely. What she did is inexcusable, and we're prepared to testify on your behalf if needed." "I appreciate that, Betty. We've also decided that the HOA will cover the cost of repainting your garage door and any other property damage Patricia caused. It's the least we can do." Rebecca filed the lawsuit the following week. It named both Patricia personally and the Pinewood Heights HOA as defendants, seeking damages for discrimination, harassment, emotional distress, and property damage. The complaint laid out everything in detail, from that first Saturday morning encounter through the vandalism and Patricia's arrest. The HOA's attorney, Donald Pritchard, called Rebecca almost immediately to discuss settlement. "His clients want this to go away," Rebecca told me after the call. "They're willing to offer you a substantial settlement, and they want to make it clear that Patricia was acting alone against board directives in all of her post-removal actions." "What kind of settlement?" "They're starting at $50,000. I think we can get more." "You've been through a lot, and there's the principle of the thing. What Patricia did was outrageous, and the HOA should have stopped her sooner." The negotiations took 3 weeks. During that time, Patricia was formally charged with attempted criminal mischief and stalking. She pleaded not guilty and posted bail, but the judge maintained the restraining order requiring her to stay at least 500 feet from my property. In early April, we reached a settlement. The HOA agreed to pay me $75,000, issue a formal written apology, establish comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, and terminate any legal defense of Patricia for her actions as a board member. Patricia personally was still facing the lawsuit for her post-removal conduct, but her attorney was pushing for a separate settlement. She doesn't have much choice, Rebecca explained. With the video evidence and her arrest record, she'd lose at trial. Her attorney knows it. She'll end up paying your attorney fees at minimum, plus probably some additional damages. Patricia's separate settlement came through in May. She agreed to pay Rebecca's remaining legal fees, which amounted to about $15,000, plus $10,000 in personal damages to me. She also had to sign an agreement prohibiting any contact with me, and agreeing to sell her townhouse and move out of Pinewood Heights within 6 months. The criminal charges were resolved through a plea agreement. Patricia pleaded guilty to attempted criminal mischief, a misdemeanor, and received 1 year of probation plus community service. The stalking charge was dropped as part of the agreement. By June, things had finally calmed down. Patricia's townhouse went up for sale in July, and she was gone by September. Betty was elected as the new HOA president, and one of her first actions was to completely overhaul the snow removal policy. Instead of mandatory rotation, the HOA hired a professional service to handle all common areas. Individual homeowners were still responsible for their own walkways, but anyone who needed accommodation due to disability, age, or medical condition could request it without question. Tom Waverly came by one evening in late September as I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the cooler weather. "Thought you might like to know, Sam, we just closed on Patricia's townhouse. Nice young couple bought it expecting their first kid. Fresh start for that unit." "That's good to hear. You know, what you did took guts, standing up to Patricia when nobody else would. You made this whole community better." "I just wanted to shovel my own walkway and live in peace," Tom laughed. "Well, you definitely got more than you bargained for, but seriously, thank you. A lot of us were afraid of Patricia. She made living here miserable sometimes. Now it actually feels like a community again." After Tom left, I sat watching the sun set over the mountains, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. The settlement money was sitting in my bank account, more than I'd expected to ever see from a lawsuit. I'd used some of it to make improvements to my townhouse, installing better appliances and fixing up the master bathroom to be more accessible for my back issues. The rest was invested safely, adding to my financial security. More importantly, I'd learned something about standing up for myself. For years after the construction accident, I'd felt diminished somehow, like being disabled made me less than other people. Patricia had fed into that feeling, treating my legitimate medical condition as weakness or laziness. Fighting back and winning had shown me that I had rights, that those rights mattered, and that I didn't have to accept discrimination just to keep the peace. Rebecca called me in October with a final update. Patricia's probation officer contacted me. "Apparently, Patricia violated her probation by contacting you through a fake email account. She sent you some kind of angry message. Did you get anything?" I checked my spam folder and found it, an email from a random Gmail address with a string of numbers. The message was bitter and accusatory, blaming me for ruining her life and destroying the HOA she'd worked so hard to build. "Yeah, I got it. I didn't even open it until now." "Forward it to me. Her probation will likely be revoked, which means she could face jail time." The woman cannot help herself. That's actually kind of sad. It is, but some people never learn. They keep doubling down on their bad behavior until it destroys them. Patricia had multiple chances to do the right thing. She chose not to. I forwarded the email to Rebecca. 2 weeks later, I learned that Patricia's probation had indeed been revoked. She was sentenced to 30 days in county jail for the violation, followed by another year of supervised probation with strict conditions. The story made the local news, not because of the jail time, but because a reporter got interested in the larger issue of HOA discrimination against disabled residents. The story ran in the Colorado Springs Gazette under the headline "HOA President Jailed After Discrimination Lawsuit." It detailed the entire case and quoted Rebecca extensively about fair housing rights. After the article came out, I got several calls and emails from other people in Colorado Springs who'd faced similar issues with their HOAs. Some were elderly residents told they couldn't have wheelchair ramps because they violated architectural guidelines. Others were disabled people fined for not maintaining their yards to arbitrary standards despite their physical limitations. I passed all the contacts along to Rebecca. She told me later that the publicity had brought in a dozen new clients, all with legitimate disability discrimination claims against their HOAs. "You started something important, Sam," she said. These cases were happening all over the city, but nobody wanted to fight back because they were scared or they didn't know their rights. Now people know they can stand up to abusive HOAs. By the time winter rolled around again, bringing new snow to Colorado Springs, my life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new snow removal service handled all the common areas efficiently, and I'd hired a local teenager to shovel my walkway for $20 each time it snowed. My back still hurt on cold days, but I managed my condition with physical therapy and medication, living as normal a life as I could. The Pinewood Heights community was different now, too. Betty ran the HOA with a light touch, focusing on actual community building rather than enforcement and penalties. She organized social events, started a community garden, and made sure everyone felt welcome. Several residents who'd considered moving because of Patricia decided to stay. I ran into Donald Pritchard, the HOA's attorney, at a coffee shop in December. He recognized me and came over to my table. "Mr. Jensen, I wanted to apologize to you personally. When Patricia first contacted my firm, she misrepresented the entire situation. If I'd known from the beginning that you had documented disabilities and that she'd refused to even consider accommodations, I never would have sent that aggressive letter to your attorney. I appreciate you saying that. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone. I've since advised all my HOA clients to establish clear accommodation policies and to consult with me before taking any enforcement action against potentially disabled residents. Your case was a wake-up call for a lot of people in my field." After he left, I thought about how one person's unreasonable behavior had rippled out to affect so many lives. Patricia had wanted power and control, and when I challenged that, she'd escalated rather than compromise. In the end, her stubbornness had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her money, and ultimately her freedom. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall. There was something tragic about watching someone self-destruct so completely over something that could have been resolved with simple human decency. If she'd just listened when I first explained my disability, if she'd shown even basic compassion, none of the rest would have happened. Instead, she'd chosen to double down on discrimination, and she'd paid the price. The following spring brought warmer weather and new growth. I planted some flowers in my front yard, taking my time and working in short sessions to manage my back pain. My neighbors waved as they passed by, and several stopped to chat. It felt like living in an actual community now, not a war zone. Rebecca called me in April with an interesting opportunity. I've been asked to give a presentation on fair housing and ADA compliance at a state conference for HOA board members and property managers. Would you be willing to join me as a speaker? I think hearing directly from someone who experienced discrimination would be powerful. I'd never considered myself much of a public speaker, but I agreed. The conference was held in Denver in June, and I stood in front of 200 HOA board members and told my story. I talked about the accident that disabled me, about trying to live a normal life while managing chronic pain, and about Patricia's refusal to see me as a person deserving of basic accommodation. The response was overwhelming. After the presentation, dozens of people came up to talk to me. Some were board members who wanted to make sure their communities were accessible and fair. Others were disabled residents who'd faced their own struggles with HOA rules. A few were people like Patricia, who admitted they'd never really understood what disability meant or why accommodations mattered. One woman, probably in her 50s, stood in line for 20 minutes to talk to me. When she finally reached me, she had tears in her eyes. "My name is Carol," she said. "I'm president of my HOA in Lakewood. Last month, a resident with MS asked to be excused from yard work requirements, and I told her no. I said everyone has to follow the same rules. After hearing your story, I realize I was wrong. I was being exactly like that Patricia woman. I'm going to fix this when I get home." "I'm glad the presentation helped," I said. "It did more than help. It changed how I think about my job as HOA president. Thank you for being willing to share something so personal." Driving home from Denver that evening, I reflected on the journey I'd been on. A year ago, I'd been an isolated, disabled man just trying to live quietly in my townhouse. Patricia's harassment had forced me to stand up for myself in ways I'd never imagined. That fight had been difficult and stressful, but it had also connected me with an entire community of people working to make housing fair and accessible for everyone. I'd found purpose in my experience, and that meant something. The legal settlements had given me financial security, but more importantly, they'd given me vindication. The law had said clearly that I was right, that I deserved accommodation, and that Patricia's treatment of me was wrong. For someone who'd spent months questioning whether I was being unreasonable or difficult, that validation mattered more than money. As summer turned to fall, I continued to live my quiet life in Pinewood Heights. My back still hurt most days. I still had limitations that frustrated me. But I also had a community that respected me, an HOA that followed fair housing laws, and the knowledge that I'd made a difference not just for myself, but for others facing similar discrimination. Tom Waverly was elected to the HOA board in the fall elections, and he immediately proposed creating a community assistance program where able-bodied residents could volunteer to help elderly or disabled neighbors with physically demanding tasks. The program launched in October, and within weeks, a dozen residents had signed up as volunteers. On a cold November afternoon, I was struggling to get my outdoor furniture into storage for the winter when a young guy I didn't recognize knocked on my door. "Hi, I'm Jason from Unit 18. I'm part of the new Community Assistance Program. Tom Waverly said you might need help with some heavier tasks." I was embarrassed at first, not wanting to seem helpless, but Jason was friendly and insistent. "It's not charity, man. It's neighbors helping neighbors. That's what community is supposed to be about." He helped me move all my outdoor furniture into my garage in about 20 minutes, a task that would have taken me hours and left me in pain for days. "Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate this." "No problem. I'm on the volunteer list, so if you ever need help with something, just call or text. We have about 12 people in the program now, so there's usually someone available." After he left, I sat in my living room thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, Patricia Henderson had been demanding I shovel communal steps while ignoring my disability. Now, I had neighbors volunteering to help me with tasks I couldn't do alone, and an HOA that actually cared about making the community accessible and inclusive. That was worth everything I'd been through. The holidays came and went peacefully. The HOA organized a winter party at the clubhouse in December, and I actually went, something I never would have done when Patricia was running things. Betty gave a short speech thanking everyone for making Pinewood Heights a welcoming community, and several people came up to me afterward to chat. On New Year's Eve, I sat on my couch watching the snow fall outside, thinking about resolutions. I didn't need to resolve to stand up for myself anymore. I'd already done that. Instead, I resolved to keep being part of the community, to keep speaking up about disability rights when opportunities arose, and to help others who might face what I'd faced. Rebecca called me on New Year's Day. "Happy New Year, Sam. I wanted to let you know that the conference presentation we did is being turned into a training video for HOA board members across Colorado. You're going to be famous in HOA circles." I laughed. "That's a weird kind of fame. It's important fame. You're making a real difference." I've gotten inquiries from HOAs in 5 different states asking about establishing better accommodation policies, all because of your case. That's good to hear. It is. And Sam, thank you for trusting me with your case. Working with you has been one of the highlights of my career. After we hung up, I sat thinking about trust. I'd trusted Rebecca to fight for me when I felt powerless. She'd trusted me to tell my story even when it was difficult and personal. The board members who'd stood up to Patricia had trusted each other to do the right thing. Trust was what made communities work, and Patricia had destroyed that trust through her actions. Rebuilding trust took time, but Betty and the new board had managed it. Pinewood Heights felt like home now, not just a place where I owned property. Winter slowly gave way to spring again. The cycle of seasons continued as it always does. Patricia Henderson was gone, living somewhere else and presumably under the conditions of her extended probation. I didn't know where and I didn't care. She'd been a chapter in my life, a difficult one, but not the whole story. The snow melted, flowers bloomed, and I planted a vegetable garden in a raised bed that I could tend without aggravating my back. Neighbors stopped by to see how the garden was growing, and I shared tomatoes and peppers when harvest time came. I was just Sam Jensen again, Unit 7, a regular guy living his life. But I was also the guy who'd stood up to discrimination, who'd fought for his rights, and who'd helped change how HOAs thought about disability accommodation. Both things were true at once. On a warm evening in May, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Tom Waverly walked by with his dog and stopped to chat. "You know what I just realized, Sam? It's been exactly 2 years since Patricia showed up at your door about shoveling those steps. Has it really been that long? Yeah, time flies. But seriously, look at how much has changed. We've got a better board, better policies, and a real sense of community. All because you refused to accept being treated unfairly." "I just wanted to shovel my own walkway," I said, repeating what had become my standard line. Tom laughed. "Yeah, but you ended up doing a lot more than that. You changed things for the better. That matters." After Tom continued on his walk, I sat thinking about his words. Change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. Justice was real, even when it took time and effort. And communities could heal and grow, even after conflict and division. The Ada lawyer had been right when she said I was disabled, and that Patricia was discriminating. The law had been on my side from the beginning. But more than legal rights, what had ultimately won was simple human decency. The recognition that disabled people deserve to live their lives without harassment, that reasonable accommodations aren't special favors but basic fairness, and that communities work best when they lift up their most vulnerable members rather than pushing them down. I'd learned those lessons the hard way, through months of stress and conflict. But I'd learned them, and so had everyone in Pinewood Heights. That education had been expensive, costing Patricia her freedom and costing the HOA $75,000. But maybe it was worth it. Maybe sometimes the only way to change broken systems is to challenge them head-on, to refuse to accept the unacceptable, and to fight for what's right even when it's difficult. As darkness fell over Colorado Springs and lights began twinkling on in windows across Pinewood Heights, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the hard parts. I'd found strength I didn't know I had. I'd found allies when I felt alone. I'd found justice when I'd been wronged. And I'd found home, not just a physical place to live, but a real community where I belonged. The steps that Patricia had demanded I shovel were still there, of course, leading from the parking area to the upper units. But now, a professional snow removal service cleared them every time it snowed, and nobody hassled disabled residents about physically demanding tasks they couldn't safely perform. It was a small change, really, one policy in one HOA in one city. But small changes add up, and every person who stands up for their rights makes it easier for the next person to do the same. I'd done my part. I'd stood up, spoken out, and fought back against discrimination. In the process, I'd helped create a better community for everyone. That was something to be proud of, something worth all the stress and struggle and sleepless nights. The American flag on my neighbor's porch fluttered in the evening breeze, and I thought about what it meant to live in a country with laws that protected disabled people, with courts that enforced those protections, and with lawyers like Rebecca who dedicated their careers to fighting discrimination. The system wasn't perfect. People like Patricia still existed, still abused power, still discriminated. But the system could work when people used it, when they refused to be silent, when they demanded better. I demanded better, and I'd gotten it. Not just for myself, but for everyone who came after me. That was the real victory, bigger than any settlement check, more meaningful than any apology. I'd made things better, and that mattered more than anything else. As I stood to go inside, my back reminding me of its limitations, I smiled. I was disabled, yes. I had chronic pain and restricted mobility. I couldn't do everything I used to do, but I was also strong, resilient, and capable of standing up for myself. Disability didn't define me, didn't limit my worth, didn't justify discrimination. I was just a person, deserving of respect and basic human decency, and I'd proven that when it mattered most. The porch light clicked on automatically as I reached the door, casting a warm glow over my small piece of Pinewood Heights. Home, safe and secure, in a community that had learned hard lessons about fairness and inclusion. It had taken a fight to get here, but every step had been worth it. I closed the door behind me, locking out the cooling night air, and settled onto my couch with a book. Outside, life in Pinewood Heights continued peacefully. Inside, I was content, knowing I'd done the right thing and that the world was a little bit better because of it. That's all anyone can really ask for, to leave things better than they found them. I'd done that, one HOA dispute at a time, one stood up for right at a time, one demand for human decency at a time. And somewhere in Colorado, probably in other HOAs and neighborhoods across the state and country, other disabled people were living their lives without harassment because someone had heard my story, learned from my case, and decided to treat people fairly. That ripple effect, spreading out from one confrontation on one cold Saturday morning, was the real legacy of everything that had happened. Patricia Henderson had wanted to force me to shovel steps I couldn't physically shovel. Instead, she'd inadvertently sparked a movement toward better accommodation policies, fairer treatment of disabled residents, and greater awareness of disability rights in HOA communities across Colorado. The irony wasn't lost on me, how her discrimination had ultimately led to progress she would have hated. But that's how change often works, through conflict and struggle, through people standing up when it would be easier to back down, through fighting for what's right even when the outcome is uncertain. I'd stood up, uncertain and scared, not knowing if I'd win or lose. And I'd won, not just in court but in the deeper sense of creating lasting positive change. That was enough. That was everything. As I turned the pages of my book, only half paying attention to the story, I thought about the future. The future where I'd keep living in Pinewood Heights, keep being part of the community, keep managing my disability with dignity and without apology. The future where other disabled people would benefit from the policies and awareness that had come from my case. The future where HOAs would think twice before discriminating, knowing there were consequences, knowing that disabled residents had rights and lawyers willing to defend them. It was a better future than the one I'd been facing that Saturday morning when Patricia showed up at my door. And I'd helped create it, one stubborn refusal at a time, one legal filing at a time, one testimony at a time. The fight had been worth it. The stress, the harassment, the vandalism, all of it had been worth it for the outcome. Justice, change, and a community transformed. I finished the chapter I was reading and set the book aside, suddenly tired. It had been a long journey from that first confrontation to this peaceful evening, but I'd made it through, stronger, wiser, and more confident in my rights and my worth. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, more snow to be cleared by professionals, more vegetables to harvest from my garden, more neighbors to chat with, more ordinary life in an extraordinary community that had learned hard lessons about fairness and respect. But tonight, I was content to simply sit in my home, grateful for everything I had, proud of everything I'd done, and hopeful for everyone who would benefit from the changes I'd helped create. The story of Sam Jensen versus the Pinewood Heights HOA was over. But the story of a community learning to do better, to be better, to treat all residents with dignity regardless of disability, that story was just beginning. And I'd be here to see it unfold, one season at a time, one small kindness at a time, one accommodation at a time. That was victory. That was justice. That was home.